In terms of the topic we could discuss today, I was thinking perhaps this idea of what some people have been calling the pattern or culture in the managerial estates of the West, and of, you could say globally, of this notion of permacrisis, that the entire system itself is predicated upon this pattern of permanent crises, the permacrisis, where you can't. You're getting to the point now where you can't have any respite from any
Yeah.
of these crises. There's something always going on. So, for example, we had the Philadelphia plane crash, that just occurred recently. So
Yeah.
it's never ending. In fact, this is the Philadelphia plane crash has been part of a long list of plane crashes that have occurred, I think, in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Very short duration of time. So, what are your opinions upon that?
Well, right off the bat, I mean, this concept of time springs to mind, and also what springs to mind is this notion of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So, like, and also, so that's two things. So, the third thing that springs to mind is trauma as an agent to change. So, in the framework of time, like, you need to usher in constant crises over a period of time to, spin the mechanisms of trauma, which are sort of embedded in and around, woven in between thesis, I can't pronounce it properly, antithesis and synthesis. So, for example, for every crisis, there's a resolution that spins off into a new crisis, a multiple crisis, and as well, all of this is ushered in a given direction over a period of time. So, that's why you need a multiplicity of crises, because they're marking time. They're literally the metronome that marks the time of the degeneration of human, perhaps consciousness or zeitgeist type understanding, and that pushes it in a given direction. So that's just kind of some broad brushstrokes in and around why you might have, like, as you say, a perma-crisis type situation where you have them in constant, coming at you constantly. Because overall, you have to assume, well, one is, I assume that the power structure has an objective, essentially, or multiple objectives. So one objective might be to like a psychological warfare objective, might be to engender confusion, might be as simple as that. But other objectives perhaps might be, more like transhumanist, where you have, this kind of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, for example, around gender, which is ushering in, eventually into the age of Aquarius, and the kind of, this marriage between technology and biology. So you're moving things all the time. So this trauma is central to human development and our destruction, or rendering into the husk form and the subsequent rebirth. So, like, trauma, for example, is, you can equate trauma with the dark night of the soul, or you could equate trauma with Jesus in the cave that comes back to life after the whatever it was, the 3 days and 3 nights, or whatever, however long he was dead, in inverted commas. So, but like, trauma as such is central to kind of spiritual development, because what happens is the ego, if the trauma is severe enough, the ego eventually is destroyed, and only the kernel of the inner self, the inner spark of the fractal of selfhood is left. But if you go to maybe perhaps a very extreme level, even that is eradicated, and you're left with a completely, there's nobody left in the driver's seat. Perhaps that's another objective, is to create space for this demonic. I mean, you were talking about it on your Saturn video. This kind of a demonic presence that has its various names. I think you mentioned Kronos and Saturn and
hmm
Satan,
the
perhaps. But
egregores, the digital
yeah,
egregores and such. Yeah.
yeah. So to kind of summarize it all, the Perma-crisis really is a trauma agent that is, how would you say it in terms of chemistry and science, the that which is the reaction,
Yeah,
that, that
the reactive chemical reactive agent. Yeah.
that which the chemical reaction cannot take place without. There's a name for that. It's that it'll come to me in a second. There's a certain entity you need to have in the reaction in order for the reaction to take place in chemistry. Otherwise, the reaction cannot happen at all. So it'll come to me in a second. But there's a word for it in chemistry. And so trauma and permacrisis really is trauma, constant trauma, and you, by having that, you're constantly spinning the wheel. You're constantly guiding the wheel with care. That wheel of human consciousness, of understanding. You're changing the parameters of freedom. You're ushering in a new way for man to organize himself socially, spiritually, and in terms of his consciousness. So so that's the energy. The energy comes from trauma, really, from the wounds of the
hmm
Christ, of the crucifixion. Is a central
Yeah.
traumatic event in Christianity, for example. It is the entirety of the religion is based around a central traumatic event to the hero figure, the Christ. So it's a necessary agent, a destructive agent, to render into the kind of husk form. The Negredo process is essentially needs something to smash things to pieces. So so all of this is tied together. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think someone mentioned that within PsyOps and psychological operations in general, and psy-war, psychological warfare, there's also another acronym, MIDO, which I think is military intelligence defensive operations, which is essentially the same thing as PsyOps and psychological warfare. But within it, there's an acronym that they use called F.A.T.E, Focus, Authority, Tribe, Emotion. Essentially, what is one is hijacking the the reactive responses of the mammalian brain, and specifically the amygdala. So the amygdala is that which, for, from neuroscience, seems to be the most stimulated during fight or flight responses, and it's very easily triggered by fear. This trigger within the amygdala and the hijacking of the mammalian brain, again through that acronym of F.A.T.E and all of its subsequent processes, it permits uh, a persuasion of the target to engage in instinctive reaction, that which bypasses all logical reasoning. Again, it leads to impulsive actions, actions that are based solely on survival instincts that again are skewed solely by, like what you're saying, the distortion of the context of the environment. So again, like religion, you essentially distort one's frame of reference by literally hijacking their brain, like almost like cordyceps, right? The cordyceps fungus, where it controls the neurological responses, it controls the actions through controlling the muscles, and it essentially infiltrates the mind. Doesn't control the mind; it infiltrates the mind with mass quantities, copious quantities of hallucinogens, which provides a comfortable numbness, a mindlessness that is blissful to the target, to the victim of the cordyceps fungus. religion works in a similar way. Of course, you see the same sort of archetype within Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus and his crew, they find themselves at the southern tip of the Peloponnese peninsula in Greece, and they stumble upon, I believe it's sirens, and the sirens provide on this island. The sirens provide these lotus flowers, and you take the lotus, you eat the lotus, you ingest it, and you go into this comfortably numb state, almost akin to unconsciousness, and you lose all perception of time. It's similar to that. So it's essentially cognitive disruption. Everything you're seeing, and even the way that the alternative spheres, the conspiracy culture, let's just call it that for lack of a better term, the way that they react to all of this is also, it's not proactive, it's reactive.
Yeah.
It's but an extension of the, I guess you could call it the hyper normalized populations. So it's still a conditioned and programmed response, and of course Psy-War agents understand this. So both what I call the alternative mainstream and the mainstream both act in unison to elicit this type of cognitive disruption in all sections of society, both the hyper-normalized, the normative populations that are, compliant, and those who are dissident or non-compliant elements within the society. All of them are being controlled, and divide and conquer is being generated as well. One example of that, we went over these plane crashes. Those are just sort of ways to seed, perhaps, narratives pertaining to drones, perhaps as well narratives pertaining to the needlecraft, right? Because it plays into that notion of the alternative. That's these, and I'm not saying they're not, but it plays into that narrative that these people are dying. Therefore, that response from the alternative sphere of needlecraft damage causing these flights to crash, erratically and or sporadically, frequently, pardon. That garners a reaction from the reflection of that, which is obviously the pro needlecraft crowd. Another potential, of course, that we see is, for example, another PSYOP that we see is Trump talking about Greenland. And we're now seeing this divide between the US and Europe and Canada. So the divide is being generated there, and it was generated quite quickly because you had Americans stating, shut up and get in line. We could steamroll you in 2 minutes on Twitter. And then obviously you had the Danes, whose territory in Greenland, I think it's an autonomous territory, or partially autonomous territory, of the Kingdom of Denmark. Them and the French and some of the other Europeans were stating that, use Americans are morons, and we will, this just shows how moronic you are, and we will defend every inch of Greenland, so on and so forth. And then the Americans are retorting with Eurotrash, and so it's quite easy to just trigger people. And you would never, who would have thought that would have been possible, where Americans and Europeans, very staunch allies for the past 70, almost going on 80 years now, are at each other's throats. But it was so easy just to conjure up these jingoistic, America first and nationalistic narratives to, again, elicit that response, which is based on cognitive disruption of the target. So they're using nationalism, jingoism. I mean, you can see what Trump's getting at and doing here. This is going to lead to a war of all against all. Everything that's going on in the world geopolitically is gaining speed in that trajectory of travel. and it's to establish the justification for an expansion of the UN program, the UN project, to encompass the entire world, to abolish nation states for, under the guise of safety and security.
Yeah.
So you see how it's used on multiple levels throughout society and throughout the globe as well. So it's, again, they're exploiting instincts here and establishing counteractive scripts within society to steer society.
In my view, what you're trying to do is you're trying to gradually pull the curtain back for the masses to expose the way things actually are. But the way things actually are already like that. But the masses are not fully up to speed. So you need to create the PsyOps sort of thing to gradually unveil. To gradually let them know and give them a reason that now there's no more nation states because of, scenario X took place and there was nearly a war over Greenland or something. You know what I mean? So a lot of these things are fait accompli. They've already happened, but they're not necessarily within the mass mindset, the public mindset, are not fully aware. Perhaps since after World War II, specifically, there is no nation states. Particularly, the West is a kind of the best concept we have of the globalist kind of unipolarity that we have globally, the new age that we're in. But the mass mindset is an anachronism still. The common sense is an anachronistic kind of sensibility. It's an antique. It's the consciousness itself is living in the past. It hasn't come up to the hyper present. It hasn't been cracked open and fully realized what's going on. So it needs to be brought in to the present via, as you said, via this ongoing kind of trauma. What did you call it? Hyper trauma, constant trauma, or perma trauma, or
Permacrisis, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you're ushering it into now because it's not in now because, so much stuff was happening behind the scenes that, it had to necessarily happen in secret, so to speak, or at least behind the curtain. So, in my view, you're slowly bringing them in to what, and but via the crisis narrative. So to get them to understand and or accept, specifically, to get them to think that they've made the choice that this is the best thing to do given the crisis that we're in. So that this is the manipulation. And the other manipulation is, it's, in my view, has to do with sanity itself and reason are, at least in part, based on a social consensus. So when one wants to know what to do or what should one do in a given scenario, one looks to their peers, family members, fellow employees, extended social group, peer group, etc. See, what do their trusted friends and family, what do they think on the matter, given matter? And they in turn make their mind up, at least in part, by reference to what the group thinks and what the group norms are, the psychological kind of established norms. So the manipulation in the kind of psychological warfare scenario is you present to the individual the consensus of the mass consensus. But the trick is you yourself fabricate that consensus like a mass fabrication. So you will fabricate, for example, to use your example, all of a sudden we have a mass outcry of jingoistic Americans vis-a-vis and our Europeans vis-a-vis Greenland. Right? But what you've actually done is you've invaded the mass media and you've pushed out this outcry in inverted commas, whereas in fact it may not exist at all, or it may exist only in a minuscule, corners of the extreme left or right or whatever. But you'll fabricate a kind of a mass response. You might, astroturf a few protests, get people waving some flags, some stuff is happening on social media, And all of a sudden, the individual thinks, "Oh, this is what people think about this, and I need to get on board with this. I need to have a political opinion on this." So, it's the same thing they did with mass culture, like the Beatles and the boy bands. They fabricated the screaming crowds initially when nobody cared about them and nobody knew who they were. But naive kind of young teenagers who were, susceptible to kind of peer pressure took it on board and said, "Oh, this is cool. I need to get into this." So it's a kind of a similar, I think, a similar mechanism.
Absolutely, yeah. There's also the notion that in a very psychologically aware totalitarian state, they would almost desire the creation of a conspiracy culture, a culture that would
Absolutely.
would seek to what would be a way to say this?
Not alone
They would,
desire it, but they'd actively go out to create it.
oh yeah, they would want social disruption. That was the term I was looking for. Yeah, they would actively go out to create it because it
Absolutely.
again, like what we're seeing within the geopolitical sphere, it provides geopolitical disruption, right? With all of the flashpoints that we see around the world. I mean, in multiple theaters now. You have in Europe, you have the Russo-Ukraine flashpoint. You have, of course, the entire Middle Eastern flashpoint, which is at any moment could spread like wildfire. And again, that fear arising from the uncertainty geopolitically is what they're hinging all of that upon. Um, and again, all of this has pre-planned solutions. So ultimately, it's
Yeah.
to justify greater surveillance and control. If that fails, then in the name of security and stability, it allows for the direct suppression of dissent and the power vacuum that's established through, again, that both domestic social disruption and geopolitical disruption. It provides that power vacuum, which can then be filled by, of course, a predetermined, a prefigured world government, right? And the abolishment, the weakening of the nation states, then the eventual abolishment of it. What you'll transition to is a sort of a digital neo feudalism, and the nation states will become vassals. In it,
Yeah.
but they already are. But I mean, like what you're saying, that will be revealed more
Yeah.
so in terms
Well,
of
for some
the.
people, it's already a stark reality. It's a stark socioeconomic reality, and they may not have sort of the conceptual awareness of it on a kind of the bigger macro scale. They may understand it locally, for example, how much their towns have changed, how much work has changed, how much the cost of living has changed, and they may have sort of integrated in isolation of any historical reference point. So they might not be able to say it was better at point X and now it's at point Y. It's terrible. They may think that this is simply the way things are. Perhaps that they may have thought this is the way things have always been, because I think the way the mass consciousness works, it kind of is very much absorbs what's around it after a certain point by osmosis. That becomes a norm, and the mind seems to lose the capacity to have a frame of reference. So that it seems that there's only a minority ever at any given point that can hold true some seed of reference point to say, well, this is not okay anymore, because by reference to what I desire, this is completely at odds with what I desire, what I consider to be freedom, for example, or what I consider to be a healthy society. So there's a drift. There's a kind of a drift into the confused future. Once that anchor has been taken up and that ship is cast adrift, after a certain point of time, the frames of reference are gone. So you see, what you have is in the foreground, in the immediate foreground of the picture, there is a lot of noise and flashing lights. smoke, mirrors, screaming, shouting, and drama. So that's what's pressed up against your face. That's pushed in your face every day. So as long as another thing that happens with this perma crisis is that when it's pushed up in your face every day, it's much more difficult for you to get a clear, kind of concise view of what's actually happening in the deeper sense, sociologically, personally, to you and society around you. Because that is where I think the mastery lies, is
Exactly.
the power structure's deeper understanding of that unseen force, that unseen mechanism that joins human beings together in a society, that gives them meaning to their world, meaning to their
Hmm.
actions, their deeds, their thoughts, um, how they react to and intermingle with one another, what
Yeah.
their sense of purpose is, where they see the manifestation of their will, of their work, what their values are. All of that is very, very much in the background, and it's hidden behind the circus, and it's hidden behind what's pressed up against your face. So up against your face, you have Trump, you have LGBT, you have the
Exactly.
virus, you have all these, you have, as Alan Partridge would say, political hot potatoes, and catch, and we've been throwing these all the time. And but to get into the deeper conversation is impossible, really. There is no. It doesn't seem to me that there is any vibrant conversation around the deeper change anywhere. I can't see it. Perhaps I can't see even almost that people have the sense of it. Really, they may have a kind of a passing sense of it. As I said, in the immediate, what affects them immediately in their immediate economic
Hmm.
reality. But to get into that deeper, because it's too difficult to discern, really. I mean, you can't really measure it in any immediate sense.
No. But
But
well,
I
what?
think, yeah, go
Jump
ahead.
in, man. Sorry. No, no, finish your point.
No, I think, like you spoke briefly the last day. We spoke briefly about Freud and Carl Jung, and we spoke in the past. What was our friend, the Frenchman, the Solar Innes,
Oh,
um,
George Bataille.
Bataille, and there's people who understand the deeper mechanisms in and around human beings, how their mind works, sort of, into this deeper levels of archetype, and how to meddle, rearrange those forces in and around people. I think they have an insight into that, a deep insight into it, and that's a thing that's very, very difficult for us to sort of understand. But I think the deeper sorcery has a very firm grasp on that, and not just in any arcane or sort of occult sense. I think they have it actually in a scientific sense too. I think they have the measure of it. They have the literal algorithmic measure of those mechanisms. They can test its temperature. They can see by degrees which side the gauge is moving. They can see whether it's near boiling or freezing point. They can predict it. They can detect it. They can analyze it. They can review it. They can modify it. They can have multiple outcomes in place. They can react. And they understand. They can dance with it. They understand it on that level. So this is why it's very difficult. But I think the good news is we still have instinct. We still have an instinct to survive as a species. So we can instinctually kind of, if we try to keep our senses keen, sharp, we can instinctively feel where they're going with it. And I think we have done it, and are actually, through the conversations and the people we've met through these forums and channels.
Yes.
A lot of us have that instinct.
I
So
think these circles as well. It's, well, at least the circles we roll in. It is, when I say look at truth, or I look at this idea of gnosis, It's about developing those keener instincts. It's about ensuring that your mind becomes a steel trap, essentially. And I think they preempt this. And this is why I see memes, again, they're almost hyperstitions. And I wanted to touch upon that later on, this idea of the hyperstition, because it ties in exactly with what we're talking about. This hyperstition of everything is fake. And again,
Yeah.
it's not much of a logical leap of faith, really, when you look at what we're discussing here, what we generally investigate and analyze in terms of media fakery and the illusory system that we reside within.
Yeah.
Of course, the irony of the system itself, it calls itself democracy, but it's anything but democracy. And of course, democracy itself, in every place it's been tried, every iteration of it throughout history has always produced the same type of oligarchy leading to a tyranny. I think as well, just to touch upon broadly what you were speaking about, it's this idea as well of, you see, for example, we see it on Twitter all the time, and it's something I've tried to steer clear of in terms of the hub of gnosis. This is why I allow, or I try to allow, as varied a spectrum of ideas and discourse and opinions on the hub of gnosis as I can. Of course, I can't actually. I tried it once, bringing in I guess you would call it a hyper-normalized, the normative individual, a compliant individual of the society, and I mean, of course, she reported the last server. It got, it was taken down almost instantaneously after her report. So there's people that are just too self-righteously fanatical to have any possible respectful and safe conversation with, right? Unfortunately. But again, that's all part of this Psy-war campaign. So it's about, with social media, this has accelerated all of this. In fact, like what you were saying, you're constantly bombarded with these this permacrisis, right? These perpetual narratives, and social media literally centralizes all of those narratives and the promulgation of them, and it establishes echo chambers just by its very algorithm itself. So it permits this dialectical chasmic divide within society to be not just established but calcified totally, calcified in a very violent way as well.
Yeah, but just on that point, like, this concept of by the way, I think social media is really a psyop for what they want to do. It's social consciousness.
Yes.
It was marketed as social media, but really it was an attempt to create a new social consciousness via, the meme or the image or the interaction or whatever, the presentation of reality through that social interaction, which came through the things like Facebook and Instagram and these things. So it was a grafting of the perception of the social onto the digital sort of thing. But there was a point I wanted to make. This concept, like, I remember I think there was a fairly well-known academic paper written, I don't know, it could be in the last 10, 15 years. I think it was The Death of History, the title, say. And I think The Death of History, it was like a postmodernist idea that because of the multiplicity of histories, that there was now in the future there would be no singular history. So history itself could be considered to be dead, because there could be a feminist history. There could be an angle of it from what happened to African American people would have had a different take on the history. The Native Americans would have had a different take on it.
The
LGBT.
intersectionality of history, almost.
Yes, yeah. The author's postmodern or post-structural view was essentially now history is doesn't exist; it has died. But like this concept of everything is fake is equals the death of reality, because as you enter the postmodern, post-structural, it's a kind of a kaleidoscopic schizoid view of things where there's a multipolar uh, anything goes kind of vibe going on, where there is no middle central real in inverted commas. So ironically, you kind of you can say in an ironic way that yes, everything is not so much that everything is fake, but that there is no real anymore. You know, it was done away with a long time ago. Now it's, as the fella says, the post-facts era. You know, facts are irrelevant. Reality is irrelevant in the era we're in.
Well, it's the post-truth era as well. So with social media, it again, it establishes these echo chambers, and you see it. People have, again, because the algorithm literally looks at what you instinctively like, then it may actually contrive or simply promote through, again, the algorithmic push for these contrarian voices. Well, not contrarian voices, but voices that are in unison with what what you perhaps instinctively believe. And then it will take you down a certain trajectory, where the center, again, as we see now, this and proof of this is that the center no longer exists, uh, which of course was established by the public square. When you had the public square, there was no way to contrive these echo chambers because you had contrarian voices that opposed or challenged your beliefs. So you had to defend your beliefs, and of course, if your beliefs didn't stand up to that scrutiny of the contrarian voice, they were pushed aside. They were resigned to the dustbin, or you were simply just laughed out of the entire square. That doesn't happen with social media. Again, it calcifies these contrarian and normative voices, and it turns them into extremes. It radicalizes all of it. So it's this irony that I guess you could call it the managerialist neoliberal order, believes that, it states emphatically that radicalism is at the forefront of its, it's at the forefront of its targets, right? To eradicate. However, they actually, through this permacrisis pattern of permacrisis, through this, like what you're saying, the collectivization of consciousness through social media, it actually establishes radicalism and extremism on both sides. And again, it's for the establishing of a cosmic divide between the two, so they dehumanize each other, and it ensures that, essentially the proletariat fight each other while the tyrant king runs free. Another thing to mention as well. So you have identical talking points, the silencing of dissent and alternative perspectives through identity-based manipulation. So this is the idea of, they try to pigeonhole everyone, right? So if you associate with certain people, or if you have certain beliefs, then you must henceforth comply fully with a specific identity or group affiliation. Again, for example, communists believe this, right? Progressives believe this. True patriots would do this. Things like that, right? Or, for example, if you don't believe X, Y, and Z, you're not a fakeologist, you're not an auto-hoaxer, you're a realologist and a shill. So that's identity-based manipulation. That's how you can, again, that appears on all sides of the aisle, both in the normative and the contrarian or non-compliant dissident populations. Micro agreements is another one that cropped up in a video I was watching on how to identify PsyOps, which is, we have to be wary of very small and seemingly harmless concessions or, requests that sort of aim to shape your identity and gradually reorient your entire behavior or to influence your behavior. So it's again, it's how cults bring people into their fold. So on social media, for example, this happens almost automatically. It's like what you're saying, you're constantly hit with the same thing that the algorithm thinks you will want to see.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're constantly being bombarded 24/7 with information that's from one side that will eventually skew your entire worldview to the point where you can't even fathom or perhaps even empathize with the opposite side. Now, I'm not saying that the opposite side is false or true, what they state, or of course the contrarian side is false or true, or what they state. In terms of psychological operations and psychological warfare, that doesn't matter. There was someone in my the Odyssey comments, and he couldn't grasp this idea. It doesn't have to be true to be real. We're talking about these things because they're narratives that affect the collective psyche.
Yeah.
They have reverberations throughout time, space, society, the social mind.
Yeah.
And the reason, and what that does, it establishes, we'll get onto this, hyperstitions, or it establishes egregores. It literally reframes one's entire viewpoint, and it turns one into a sort of tabula rasa for that specific ideological bent. And they turn into self-righteous fanatics.
Yeah.
And I've seen this firsthand in every and all dialectics throughout society and ideologies. So yeah,
Well,
again, it's yeah. Jump in, man. Sorry.
like an interesting an angle on this thing is like, whatever you think or feel you is true, and you find your corner and your, as you say, your echo chamber. So, or another way to look at that is the normative collective consensus of society has been completely broken into smithereens. And what you have is an archipelago of different opinions that are at loggerheads, with each other. So for any given position on anything, you will find the opposite as well. So stuff sort of, number one, is broken into a million pieces because everything finds its own island. Then everything finds its own opposite, the opposite to that argument. So everything eventually cancels itself out because, for every plus, it eventually meets a minus. It cancels itself out. If you look at it in, waveform, kind of in physics, we're two waves like amplitude or whatever it is, they meet and they cancel each other out. So what you're left with in the wider socio-political scenario is dead energy, stasis, or decay, because you can't have any political movement or any collective sort of momentum can't grow because everything is in pieces, finding its own island, and everything finds its own opposite, and eventually gets cancelled out or just gets stuck in the logger at loggerheads with something. So an example of that is everything is fake. So certain people believe that to be true. They've arrived at that opinion, and they'll necessarily meet the other half who'll say, "Well, everything's absolutely not fake. You're the victim of a psyop, and and the two camps will end up at each other's throats, and there'll be no movement forward, So I think that's part of perhaps part of the game, how to manage society and keep it down really, and keep it in a state of confusion. So you see it as well with the political thing. So you know, at one point you get a avalanche of this kind of liberal dialectical stuff, you know, be it climate or stuff around gender or race, all these sensitive, hypersensitive issues. And then you'll think, well, that's what they're pushing, right? That's what they're pushing. And then you get the antithesis, I can pronounce it, antithesis, you know, Trump, for example. He'll come in, randomly come in. He's evidently part of the power structure, and he'll come in with the opposite side of the argument. So to go back to your plane crash example, on the Potomac River, where the Black Hawk helicopter crashed straight into a civilian jet with about 80 or 90 people on board and killed everyone. And he'll come out and he'll say, you know, that's due to the recruitment of people with, you know, mental handicaps. That's what caused that crash. There was a bias in the you know in the people who get people into the air traffic control. They said there wasn't enough people with disabilities, and that's what he blamed it on. He came out on the media and he said that. So it's his job. He's taken on the other side of the dialectical, and so you're shepherding both sides all the time, like, you know. But there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I see we've been joined by Armunn. Hello, Armunn.
Hi, Armin.
Do you have an opinion upon Psy Wars, social media, and just in general psychological operations and how they perhaps function, work, and its impact on society?
I do, although, you know, uh, I have to touch upon again, you know, this idea that is associated with everything is fake is associated with the term coined as auto-hoaxing. And this, I mean, I need to correct it again and again, because if there is a belief that anything is fake, then it's not auto-hoaxing. And of course, we can use a different terminology if that one, you know, if that one you know gets an itch, but it is important to understand the actual dynamics of the philosophical application. And to clarify, since I see we're being recorded, it is, I mean, you have someone that has been proven to lie to you over and over again. At the very least, skew the truth, which is already a lie, but nonetheless. So the next time that individual comes to you with a story, you are not going to automatically assume it's real, that this story he is telling is true. You're going to suspect and look for, you know, look at the claims being made from the story, look at the agenda, so the objective of the story. You know, if it's, you know, one of your friends that wants to see me as very strong and a great fighter, he'll say, you know, like Bigsby on Train Spotting, he'll say that he went, you know, into a bar and cleaned house, and, you know, we defeated 20 guys, right? And then you look at the claim, you know the source to be a liar, and you go, you know, maybe that's not true. So you start looking at whatever is presented, and you find usually, because that conclusion only comes after checking the evidence, you find usually that something's wrong. If you don't find anything wrong, then by all means, you know, take it as it is. I mean, if you find that, actually this one seems to add up, this one has nothing wrong with it, then you go with it. But usually when you look at the stories presented from such sources, you always find something wrong. So I wanted to make that clarification. Another thing that you were talking about was that Zeal was touching upon was the islands within society. So this sort of dissolution of a unified society. And although that is important when constructing something, of course, if you're going to build a building, and you, Silas, work in construction, so you know what I'm talking about, of course, you all have to, perform some teamwork for it to actually be put together, right? Now, the problem is that, and we need to take this into account, is that society had already become nefarious to the individual. And this is something we have to assume and not evade from. It had, there is no greater good if that greater good ignores the individual good. And society had no longer, of course, steered that way. I'm not saying it was organically so, but it is a fact that society had ignored the individual good in favor of a greater good. And this is an effect of collectivist ideas that were introduced, and you talk about that at length, Silas, with the managerial propositions and ways of doing things. And so it is necessary, it is in fact a great opportunity in the sense of self-observation, that, dogmas, societal dogmas, are taken down, because this is an opportunity for reevaluation between what is priority and what isn't, what is important and what isn't. And this is something that only at an individual level can be done, because at a collective level, there will always be authority figures that, do that for their own interests, if you follow them, right? And this is why I continuously struggle to convey the idea of the reawakening of the individual ego within each of us. Because with a reawakened ego, we are able to filter not only input from the outside, but also filter that set of priorities. What is priority from what isn't? And also, eventually, what is organically living. And when I say organic, it's not necessarily, nature and whatever. But what is, the organic, true living as a human being, and what is, automaton living, that kind of thing. And also, with an awakened ego comes the decision center. And this decision center is of the utmost importance, because I think from observation that we are here, each of us are here to experience something organically, in the sense of there is a context that is organic for us to live. But we have been living someone else's life all our existence. We are taught to be this, we are taught to be that, we are taught to behave in this way, we are taught to choose that instead of this, etc., etc., etc. And we never actually, or very few of us actually, choose something organically ours, organically individual, that we feel essentially that we are supposed to be living, right? All three of us here have, at the very least, had a glimpse of this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But this needs to be the rule, not the exception. And this is why this period of chaos, as unpleasant as it is and as uncertain as it is, because uncertainty is part of life. We can plan all we want, there will always be unpredictability. It's impossible to evade, right? Even today, I was supposed to have a meeting but there was an accident on the bridge is cut off, I couldn't go. Right? So I had a plan. Other people had plans with me, I couldn't go. Right? Unpredictable. So it is up to us to reawaken that ego so that we can live with the unpredictability. Of course, I call it also improvisation, because that is much closer to whatever we are supposed to organically be experiencing here. And social media, like going back now to the main topic that you asked about, social media is a new way of conformity to someone else's life, someone else's experience. I mean, if you scroll through, whether it's Instagram, I mean, Instagram I do have, but I suppose it's the same on all others, Facebooks and TikToks and whatever. You see a representation of someone else's life that often you take as your own. Not me in particular, but people in general will take as their own. They will see something, maybe this is right, or maybe this is good for me, oh, maybe I should do that, maybe I should. And people start getting involved with playing a character on top of another character on top of another character, and become so farther away, because go so farther away from their essential selves that they don't even remember that they had an essential self to begin with, because their decision center becomes externalized. This is good, this is bad, this is beautiful, this is ugly. This is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false. If that comes from an external source, you are taken. You are already taken. You are a zombie. There's no escape from that. So social media really made that accelerate. And it not only accelerated conformity, but it accelerates this idea of deconstruction, that although the intentions behind it are, of course, scripted and nefarious, it is also for us, for those of us who at least have had a glimpse of the ego and the essential self, it is also an opportunity for us. And it's how we handle it. And to each of us is probably a different answer. My answer does not need to be yours. So all of us need to find that. But the sheer importance of not automatically trusting facts from sources that are unreliable, and to check the evidence and to check the objective is absolutely important, so that we don't get involved with false memories. And false memories determine behavior through the creation of a mental personality aligned with that foundation. So, sorry for the rant, but this is my my take on it for now.
When we were discussing auto hoax and fakeology, when I was discussing everything as fake, I wasn't necessarily conflating the two, but it's like what you were saying right at the end there. That's what we were touching upon. It's this idea of the collectivization of thinking and identity-based manipulation, which, granted, as we've just stated here, that can even exist in the most skeptical of communities. And I think the common ground, perhaps the misunderstanding between our positions, but the common ground between them is this notion that the individual has an understanding, almost instinctively, intuitively, that they've developed through pattern recognition, but through as well mental development, cognitive development. Their cognition is of a less cluttered nature, should we say, right? In terms of extraneous, external sources cluttering it. And what has occurred is they don't, again, at that point, they're not necessarily auto-hoaxers or fakeologists. They're just them, if you will. They're the authentic self. I think
that's entirely true and accurate. It is true. It is observable that there are people who truly, in an automatic sense, believe things to be false, right? And even when that, sorry,
Armunn, may I just stress this point as well? It's not necessarily just the idea of the belief, of the automatic belief. It's so, for example, those comments that I got where, and what we were discussing here with the social media and PsyOps. So this idea of the again, identity-based manipulation based upon sloganeering and buzzwords and ad hominems. So, for example, manipulation of tribal affiliation. You're either a fakeologist or a realologist, or if you espouse this certain idea, you must be a shill, even if everything else you stated was, was correct. But that's why I touch. But of course, all of us here don't. we take what the government say if a grain of salt, a healthy grain of salt. But I agree with your idea regarding, if you have a known liar and they've been lying their entire life, of course you're not going to believe that they're telling the truth on this occasion. And if they lie on that occasion, the next occasion you're not going to believe that they're telling the truth. I agree with that principle. You would have to, from the outset, even if it is a bias, you would still have that bias, no matter what, that they are lying until obviously proven innocent. It's just because of the pattern. It would creep in. And of course, I have that bias as well. So in that sense, I am an auto-hoaxer,
I listen, I agree that there, I mean, in the same sense that, people from in other approaches will, I mean, for example, if you're, let's say you've studied, I don't know, feet all your life, right? You're a foot doctor, whatever it's called, pediatrician, or is that for children? I never know. Anyway, you've studied feet all your life, right? So someone comes up with you to you with a health problem, and you're going to say, "Oh no, that stems from the foot," because that's what you know all your life, right? You're not going to have a clean look at the situation and perhaps say, "Well, listen, this is something I haven't studied, so I don't know. I don't know this particular illness. I don't know." No, you're going to impose the the things you have studied upon that. So there is that fallacy, very prevalent, and it's observable, and I do not deny it. But one thing, and the distinction that I always make is, one thing is an approach, a philosophical even approach to the observation itself. Another is how there are people that misuse it and don't apply it at all, and just becomes a dogma, and it becomes a belief, and it becomes a collective system, like you just stated. That is observable. I don't deny that that exists, right? But it has to be continuously corrected. And of course, we must come up with a term, because that term is already tainted by who coined it, right? And I requested for evidence in that matter, and I was satisfied with the evidence. I changed my mind, right? Other people, if they require, they will ask for that evidence, and they will observe it. If it's enough for them, they will change their mind. But so maybe we should use a different term than auto hoax, because it was coined by someone that brings up a lot of emotions in a lot of people. And so it can't be observed coldly and rationally. But the distinction I always make is between what it actually is and how people are often misusing that approach. And they don't do it properly. And they simply believe, and they simply, take it automatically as false. But so the collective islands is exactly what we should avoid, even though in this chaotic situation that society is in, that is usually the most tempting. We have to avoid that, and that is a part and parcel of reawakening the ego, like I've stated before. And we have to, even if we become an island of one, we have to stay true to what we observe, right? Even if we become an island of one, even if everyone else around us is, trying to pull us, that's not, it's this, it's the other, it's whatever, and we have observed something, and we have, looked into something, and we have concluded. And if that is what we found, until some other evidence or some other, observation is made that may, change our minds, we should, not be influenced by any of the islands, because that is the temptation. Because humans are not only naturally gregarious, and so they are pulled into groups, but mental personalities who are not in contact with their egos are even doubly, triply so, because they lack an internal authority figure. And only people with an internal authority figure are able to, when everyone else is against, are able to say, no. You want me to do this? I say, no. I don't agree. Oh, but you're alone, everyone else. Do you think you're better than everyone else? I don't think I'm better or worse. This is me, my decision. This is what I observe. This is what I know. Right? And this is therefore also a test. And these tests eventually promote, as you move a muscle and the muscle becomes stronger. Right? So these promote the strengthening of the ego, of that decision center and filter, regardless of the pressure. And of course, there are certain things we need to choose our battles. We don't go headlong into a crowd and start start some shit, right? But in the key important things, even if we're an island of one, we have to remain true.
Yes, I agree. I think as well, in terms of the wider society, it's you're beginning to see that collectivization through all facets of across the spectrum of all social variants. And again, like what you're saying, that's something we have to sort of, reflexively push back against. There's something I want to ask you, Armunn, but I'll get some comments from Zeal just on what we've been discussing. Do you have anything to say, Zeal, regarding perhaps pattern recognition, auto-hoax, and this idea of, again, there's a pattern of lies from the system. Thus, you're almost naturally inclined, I guess you could call it a bias, to assume that they're lying. Well, not assume it. I mean, most of the time they are lying. I can't even think of an example where the government have not lied on something, on some issue. But do you have any comments, Seal?
But take for example this transhumanist, this capacity potentially for the technology to,
I think you're
biodigital
covering
convergence.
your. Are you covering your mic?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
2,
can hear you now.
1, 2.
Yep.
Yeah, on this notion of lying, telling lies, and deception, like the first rule of warfare is deception. It's an act of deception, really, to deceive the enemy, to maximize your attack and whatever, and your return from your efforts in war. So likewise, you see, it's catch-22. The genius of it is, if people begin to believe that they're always being deceived, then there's an inherent benefit, obviously, there to the enemy, to the power structure, in that at times they can do things in plain view, that they're actually doing, that are actually happening and are actually real, but the potential for them to be believed to be false, that they're not real. So it works both ways. You can discount something, or you can say something's not real, it hasn't happened or is not happening, and prove that it was fake. But likewise, you could believe that something is fake when it's not fake. So it's a kind of a
Well,
dangerous territory.
yes, but again, we go into the word that you just used. Believe it's fake. You either see that it is or it isn't. You either have evidence that points towards it being fake, or you have evidence pointing towards it being true. And the problem with, this is a logical issue, which is there are no half truths. A half truth is a lie, right? I think
But
we all agree upon that, right? So if something is partially a lie, then everything is a lie in that particular presentation, right? If someone says something and you detect a part of it being a lie,
yeah,
then it's not true, right? Because truth means it's absolute. It means that, I mean, if you look at something, for example, the LA fires, right? I have no doubt that something is burning, that houses are burning,
mm,
right? I have no doubt about that. But I did see problems with footage. What does that say? Does it mean that nothing is burning and everything is fake? No.
mm,
It means that what we are shown is pointing towards or feeding a discussion, for example, of, oh, it was space lasers, or it was magnetic weapons, or it was whatever. Because all these things come in a package, right? Now, what we know for certain is something is burning. That we know. I mean, we have several uh, um, sources that undisputably show that something is burning and houses are burning. Were those houses with people inside? Did people really die? I don't believe that. I don't think so. I don't think so. Do I know for certain? No. It's a territory that as of yet, I don't have enough data. What I do have enough data is seeing problems with the footage shown. And when people analyze evidence as if it's a reliable evidence by itself, when you know the source has skewed imagery, has skewed footage, now even has access to AI technology that can, put on CGI on anything. I mean, one of the latest videos that I saw that I found, well, it's funny, was George Michael with an Arnold Schwarzenegger face singing Careless Whisper in Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. Should I assume that Arnold Schwarzenegger dressed up as George Michael and sang that song? No. But I saw it. I could say, no, I saw it. I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger as George Michael singing that song. It's the same thing. One thing is the facts that we can ascertain, that we can assess. Another is to then extrapolate the story from what is being presented, because what is being presented wants us to build the story for them. They, of course, direct several sources towards certain conclusions, but they want us to participate in the story building. Because if we participate with the story, and if we say it was space, for example, without knowing for sure, if we say it was space lasers, then we have already committed to a story, and we can't. It's going to be very hard. It awakened to change our minds. And what I see is with those kinds of stories again, is that it always, and if you look at it, you'll see that it always presents the Wizard of Oz as having extreme magical powers. Extreme magical powers. They always have extreme magical powers. They're like gods. They have all this technology. Then if they have all this technology, why do they have to fake things? They can do it for real. They can push a button. Oh, they want depopulation? They push a button and kill whoever they want. They have the technology to do that, right? And say it was a nuke. Say it was the Martians invading. And it's always a threat. Why? Because the threat has the effect of making us build and participate in the story. The threat is what makes us participate. Oh, the end of the world. Oh, it's the asteroid. Oh, it's the aliens. Oh, it's the whatever. So we participate. And when we participate, it's like a religion. Participate from the gospel of the day. Right? We all pray together to the gospel of the day. And of course, some pray on the Catholics, others pray on the Protestant side, others pray on the Baptist, others pray. There are several sects, islands, like you said. But the gospel is more or less the same. You understand? So this is what I mean by the distinction between what we can rely upon, which in this case, this particular example is, yes, fires. Of course, something is burning. And that something seems to me to be, in fact, the houses in that location. Right? Another is to extrapolate based on what is presented as if it was, a fact. What is being presented is clean, is it's a window to what is actually happening when it's not. I mean, we saw in the war of the Ukraine war when it started. We saw news reports. I have one or two videos that I saved with video game footage. Video game footage, actually video game footage.
That was from that, I think it's called Ace Combat. It's a flight simulator. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and listen, how many people saw that? How many people realized what?
Oh no, very few. It was being reposted by even mainstream outlets.
Right.
Everyone essentially believed it as fact. In fact, some were even claiming, it was the hero of either side, the savior, the ghost of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think Russia had a similar sort of savior figure.
Exactly.
But I agree. All of it's like what you say, that idea of the gospel of the day, or even the stage performance, the play, the story of the day, is it always follows the same sort of formula. I agree, and it's that idea of the meta script, the blueprint. And it's like what we were discussing before you jumped on. It's there was this video I was watching, and it was from an ex-Psy-War individual, and he mentioned that the hijacking of the amygdala of the mind, again, it's associated supposedly with fear triggers, the fight or flight response, essentially. And if you can trigger that, you go beyond the or you trigger the instinctive reaction, which can bypass all logical reason and faculties within the mind. And of course, it leads to impulsive and steerable behavior under the guise, of course, within the individual of, survival instincts, the self-preservation instinct. And he called it F.A.T.E. Now, F.A.T.E. is a PsyOp idea. It was actually, I believe, it's a development of what was discussed in Mind War by Michael Aquino. And essentially, it's focus, authority, tribe, emotion. And what that is, it's the 4 primary pillars that you are attacking and developing within any psychological operation and narrative. So the first one, focus, which is repetition, shocking visuals, and fear-inducing scenarios to grab one's attention. You get this constantly, as we've mentioned, through the news feed. He even says it with the feed, right? This idea of the feed, the social media. I think it was Zeal that mentioned it's this idea of the establishment of the social consciousness, and of course is divided, divisive, and as labyrinthine and complex as it is. Authority, using trusted figures or experts, even trusted contrarian figures, to endorse narratives. They can be alternative or mainstream, even if it's outside their expertise, of course, right? It's the ad verecundium fallacy. They appeal to authority. So you establish the authority, you make it seem as though they have authority, and they push a certain narrative. One example of this, potential example, of course, because we don't have any, well, I don't have any evidence on hand, just my gut instinct, where, for example, throughout COVID, you had all of these various experts. You had the experts on the you had the likes of oh god, his name eludes me now. God, you had the
Tony Holohan was the guy in Ireland. He was brought out by the Irish government as the COVID expert.
Yes, you had these COVID experts. There's one in America, and I forget his name now. he's
Fauci.
You had Fauci. There was another one, and he's been through them all, essentially. From, oh god, I forget his name now. It'll probably dawn on me, and I'll just mention it later on. And then, of course, you had the contrarian experts as well. The
Good Doctor on YouTube. Do you remember that British guy? He's still on there. He's the Good Doctor. He's kind of a homegrown YouTube channel. And,
Vernon Coleman, I think, was one. He was the old guy. Is that who you're referring to?
Yeah.
Oh, the armchair guy. Yeah, I know who you mean.
Yeah. And you also had ones that were they were on both sides. They were non-aligned, essentially, but they aligned with both sides at one point or another. For example, that large YouTube channel, I forget his name now. Was it Ferguson? Is it? Oh God, his name eludes me. He was the nurse, but he insisted that he was a doctor, right?
Yeah.
He almost, again, he appealed to that expertise, to that authority position, to push certain narratives. A lot of people got the needle crafts because of him and what he stated. So that type of idea. Another one was, for example, on the events in 2001, that major event with the two towers. You had experts on either side, right? The contrarians and the compliant normatives, the mainstream. And then you have, of course, tribe. So you have focus, authority, that's F.A.T.E, and then you have the T, which is tribe, exploiting tribal instincts, and by creating in-group and versus out-group dynamics. For example, patriots versus traitors, pro-needlecraft versus needlecraft deniers, right? This idea. Conspiracy theorists versus scientists. This type of notion, and it's all about, in essence, establishing this manipulation along the lines of tribe, along the lines of identity-based manipulation. So they establish literal subcultures, parallel societies, which they use to bring people into that mindset of dehumanizing the other. The language, the othering language that you see cults develop. And then the last one is emotion. Triggering strong emotions like fear, hope, or outrage without providing clear evidence. So, or again, doesn't provide clear evidence, but provides the masquerade or the guise that they're providing clear evidence, right? Where all they're doing is basing all of this upon invented expertise, invented authority, projection of an authority figure, the invention of that. So, I mean, it's to target, literally to target the mammalian brain. They're hijacking it.
Yep.
They can't directly get you to do something. You have to feel as though you're doing it yourself.
Exactly. Participate in the story. Exactly. I absolutely, I saw that video as well. And I absolutely with the conclusion of the method applied. I think it doesn't even go far enough. You know, it should have gone farther. But it's a great video nonetheless, and it's a great description. And it really wants us to get involved with the story. From one side or the other, it doesn't matter. It wants us to get involved. And the best rule that because there is a place for emotion. There is a healthy place for emotion. There is a healthy place for anger. There is a healthy place for love, of course. There is a healthy place for all emotions. And a healthy moment, let's say, for all emotions. But one thing that we should pay attention to is never get emotions involved when looking at a screen. Because the screen has been proven time and time again to have lied. Sometimes we detected it, oftentimes we didn't in our past, right? So do not respond or try not to respond emotionally to anything on the screen. But if something is happening that you yourself witnessed, that you yourself saw and was present for, then if it's justifiable, then yes, use your emotion in a proper manner. There is a place for anger. Anger is not wrong. Anger is not wrong. You know, if someone is, attacking one way or another, you or a loved one, anger is a proper response. It is a response that, resolves a situation or potentially helps resolve a situation of a threat. But don't hold on to it. Don't start living as if now everything is that. Resolve it and move on. Don't linger. But absolutely agreed with that video about the focus, the authority, the tribe, and the emotion. Absolutely agreed. And this, the fact that it forms the word fate is also very telling, because a lot of people on both sides, mainstream and alternative, whatever you want to call it, have taken this stance of inevitability. It is inevitable, so, well, no, it isn't inevitable. Not for you, not for the individual. Sure, you have to deal with society, but you have an inner life, an organic inner life. And that no one can take away. You can give it away, but no one can take it from you. And that's why they want us to get involved. Because if we get involved, we give it away. Now it reminds me of that Red Hot Chili Pepper song, right? Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
Exactly, yeah. Do you have any comments to mention upon that, Zeal? If you give me 2 minutes, gentlemen, my dog needs out for the toilet. He's scratching at my door. Just continue on with your comments, Zeal, and I'll be back momentarily.
That's a PsyOp.
That is a yeah. I'm actually
Your dog is a
into-
shill.
my dog is a shill. It's a trap, Silas. Run. Be back soon. Sorry, Zeal. Please continue.
Like we put on a video with mice on YouTube for the cat, and the cat gets absorbed in this video. These mice running back and forth. Like she knows it's fake, but she kind of draws her in, like a little psyop. It affects her brain, She can't distinguish it in a way. As as you're saying there, it goes into a deep part of her brain, and she thinks she's looking at real mice. Some part of her brain does, anyway.
Yes.
They're affected by these things.
Yes. It's. It's like if you're walking down the street, can you not look? I mean, you can force yourself not to look, but your first thing is, wow, So it's exactly the same. The response is automatic. It's biological, right? And this is why the presence, healthy presence of the ego is so important, because it can override a response that is not adequate to the context, So yeah, absolutely agreed. It is automatic and very, very primal. That's what they touch upon. Yeah.
But I think a lot of what's happening as well has been sort of spin doctored as being somehow kind of glamorous, attractive, and so it's as if there's an unhealthy desire for things to go in the direction that they're going, because I think it's the way it's been presented. It's like the apple in the Garden of Eden. The serpent has tempted man. The serpent has tempted humanity, but they've bought into it because of the way the thing is packaged. That's part of the interaction with the demon, where you leave yourself open for the possession. Because the demon really is a liar, as to use that line out of the Exorcist movie. The demon is a liar. So the demon lies to you, deceives you, and tempts you, and presents you with a hook, which is you get the initial hit. It's like the heroin needle. But after, a short period of time, then it degenerates into cruel addiction, So I think there's definitely a veneer of that type of thing. Like, for example, take the American president. He's bombastic, loud, gregarious, humorous, boisterous. And, it's fun. It's like a circus character. It's a clown, And it kind of has a kind of funny, people like to say, you know what he said today, and he did this, and he did that, whatever. But the darkness, that kind of clown covers up this darkness hiding underneath in the cellar. Like that serial killer in Chicago back in the 70s. I think it was John Wayne Gacy was his name. He used to dress up as a clown, but in the cellar there were bodies. So you had this weird dichotomy, or like Jimmy Savile would be an example of that type of character, smiling, media personality, larger than life, did stuff for charity, and loud clothes and kind of cool sunglasses and whatnot, and smoking the cigar. But like it hide the dark stuff is just right nearby, So that this whole the events and the time we're in has been sold in this kind of way. It has this veneer of circus, fun and games. It's humorous and it's kind of stylized, stylish, and it's somehow attractive in a certain kind of way, because it's fun. It's
Everyone wants to be a
novel.
rock star. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like the darkness has been cleverly hidden, and it's as dark. It's a hideous type of darkness. They've
Yes,
managed to.
and also, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, also note that the devil by itself, and you've said correctly, it is a deceiver, and the devil by itself can't do anything to us, but it can convince us to do it to ourselves and to the others. Right?
Yeah.
So this is a very important aspect to understand. And this is why they want us to participate in their stories, in their scripts, get involved. Because if we get involved, okay, let's say left versus right. Yeah. So you say, oh, it's true, the leftists are, these bad. You see a leftist on the street, and that may lead you to take aggressive action. So you were convinced, I mean, I'm not saying you particularly, but a person can be convinced to actually affect the external world and the lives of others by getting involved with a story that brings him to a position of, I need to do something about these guys. These are the enemy, right? So the devil itself did nothing in actuality but sell you a temptation that that individual bought. So it's again, and I've said this years ago in a video, which is self-deceit, right? If a con man knocks at your door and sells you something that is false, is counterfeit, is whatever, right? Sells you a scam. He may have sold you, but you bought it.
Yeah.
So to say, yeah, in one way you can say I was a victim, sure. But in actuality, you were a participant in a scam. Because you didn't look at things thoroughly enough, or you didn't analyze them, whatever it was. Right? So someone sells, but someone buys. And when they buy, then they affect the world. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was actually thinking about that very point that you just made during the week about this mechanism of the choice. So, you find yourself in a certain eventuality in your life and you say, well, I was a victim. But then when you analyze it, you made a choice at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's a choice that's made kind of under certain conditions. It's not like a simple choice that maybe you'd like to between purchasing a red car or a white car. It's a kind of a choice that's informed by certain eventualities and the temperature of things that develop over time. But at a certain point, some aspect of your situational awareness is informed by the environment or by your state of self. But at that point, however, you still make a choice. But there's a kind of a graph, like there's factors in it, like the Swiss cheese model. There's various factors that lead up to that point where you make that choice. So I remember somebody saying one time that these linguistic differences between the word demon and dominion. This lady made this relationship between these words that your dominion, she said, was your selfhood. Your domain or your dominion is the border of your selfhood. It is your your nation, the wall around your nation that is yourself. And if that gets broken or you let something in, then you know that dominion or domain is entered by the demon. You get broken into. So you had to be careful about your domain or dominion in case the demon would come in. So at some point, yes, there's a choice, but at other points, you have to not just be careful to make that you might make the wrong choice, but you have to be also be careful that you don't arrive at a point where you're weak enough that you may be in danger of making that wrong choice. So you have to protect your dominion. But I think this ties in with
Yeah.
an earlier point you were making
Yeah.
about selfhood, about the individual, about the awareness of selfhood and the individual to make an informed choice. Because I think, Armunn, you had some instinct around perhaps that the society had failed at that, perhaps at this point. So you can't necessarily rely on the society to help you make a decision because perhaps that society is schizophrenic or is in a dystopian state. So eventually we find ourselves back at the position of the individual. And to use your term, we rely on the kind of natural, I think you use that type of terminology, natural, innate, inner sense of what is real. That's organic, I think was the word you used. So, we have to rediscover that and do a bit of archaeology to find that so that we can be careful of our dominion and domain and in turn try to, be in a healthy position to make good choices as opposed to being in a position of poor health or dysfunctionality where the chances of us making the wrong decision are more likely than not, But we're never off the hook. Never off the hook. We're always in that transaction. And I think actually, just to follow on your point about this, the demon and how it in itself is has no power. It's us that signed the contract. But I think it's in Islam I think it's in the Quran that the demon, the devil, is referred to as a whisperer. They use this
Yes.
word whisperer, and I thought that was a really interesting word because if you can imagine this entity is constantly whispering in your ear, gently, quietly, and just softly, and there's nothing aggressive about it. There's nothing shouting or commanding you or demanding you or bullying you to do something. It's a gentle, slow kind of. It's all perhaps even a nice tone to listen to. It's maybe even soothing or even alluring. So it kind of gently brings you along. So that's what we have to be careful of.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I agree. And it becomes, I mean, what you were saying about we're never off the hook. And sometimes this doesn't mean it shouldn't be taken at least as, continuous stressful self-policing, like, oh, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
that. Oh, that's not what is meant. What is meant is, you develop healthier habits of
Yeah.
ego strengthening. And those healthier habits, when anything comes, they get you healthier. They get you at a point where you're healthier and so not as to, the influence or whatever it is, right? And so, because usually when this is said, and this is, I mean, in religion, there's these people that, oh no, that's demon. Oh, thoughts I'm having. Oh, times or whatever. And this is stressful. This actually weakens the ego, because you're getting into a spiral. The demon as the deceiver would laugh. Oh, I got one,
Yeah.
right? I got one. This guy is weaker now because now he sees demons everywhere, and he resorts to me. He resorts to me, to the devil, to the story, to remove them. So, or to appease them, let's say, or to um, send them away temporarily. So it is a matter of habit. Our mental personalities are made up of habits. Often, unfortunately, it is the case that these are habits that are nefarious to our selfhood. And so they simply need to be analyzed, revisited, as I say about, reevaluating the false memories, the foundational false memories. Like the
But
idea of, yeah.
like it's important to as well point out the wider picture that also the angel is there, alongside the devil or the demon is the angel is there. So, these forces are kind of
Yeah.
working in a kind of a eventual balance. They may go dangerously out of kilter every once in a while, but once the thing rectifies and resolves itself again, you may find that a large part of you has been burned off, and even though the process was traumatic, painful, like in the fullness of time, when you apply a bit of wisdom, you can see, well, look where it led, and look what I took out of it, and look where I arrived at. So sometimes, like it was like right at the very start of the conversation tonight, Silas was talking about trauma and permacrisis. So these crises sometimes, and inner trauma, self traumas of the self, are kind of growth pangs, if you will, if you wish to
Yeah.
look at it that way, because from that dark night of the soul and the breakdown and the burning off of these purities, when you finally resolve, you perhaps arise out a stronger person or better person or a more complete or holy person, or you've integrated these forces that were at odds with each other or that were causing massive conflict. So you arrive out, essentially stronger.
Absolutely agreed. In fact, that's what I meant. Um, when I earlier um, talked about like exerting a muscle, right? Um, like you need to. This is an opportunity. These moments needed to occur. First of all, because society wasn't, the so-called greater good of society was no longer aligned with the greater good of the individual, right? Except for a few individuals, but that's not. Um, and so it needed to come down anyway, right? Of course, it's a controlled demolition of society. Of course, it's being steered and everything, but it needed to come down anyway. So this period of chaos is, like I said, an opportunity to exert the muscles, right? And you were talking about the angel is always present there as well. Absolutely. The difference is the angel doesn't even talk words, doesn't even talk. The angel's influence, the, let's say, essential self influence, is very, very different from that of demon. Let's call it like that, just for the sake of argument, because the demon will whisper in words, "Oh, it's better to do this. It's better to do that," while the essential self, or in your terminology, the angel, doesn't do that. Doesn't talk. It just presents you with an obvious answer, one that you can't evade. Of course, you can ignore it, but you can't pretend that it's not there. You know.
Well, that ties very much in with like the earlier conversation about the death of the real and everything being fake, and just these general concepts that there is an eventual hammer of truth that hits you straight between the two eyes, knocks you clean out of whatever deception or delusion you might have wound up in. That hammer of truth is unavoidable and infinite and eternal. Like it is the hammer of reason and perhaps of God, if you will. And when I say God, I mean that which orders chaos
Yeah.
or creates from the void. So that hammer, so so it's there all the time. It's an unavoidable constant throughout time.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. I agree. It's always there. We can ignore it, but it's always there. And
And
eventually,
I think we instinctively search for it. We lose it as well. There's some sort of a compass within us that, you know, it's part of our struggle times is to find it and to lose. But actually, this losing sight of it and becoming lost is no bad thing if one realizes that that in itself is part of. Like somebody told me recently at work that he'd become very stressed because of work, and he'd had a kind of a breakdown, and he started listening to podcasts and trying to find help to know what to do. But I kind of said to him, like, at times when you're in that situation, your natural instinct is, what do I do? How do I get better? I don't want to feel this way. I feel horrible, and I want to get better. And most of the available stuff will say, look, if you do X, Y, Z, do breathing, do mindfulness, do meditation, swim, go out, and etc., etc. But very, very little of the narrative will tell you, sit with it, be with it. You're there for a reason. You have to experience it because it's bringing you somewhere. But what you must believe in is the process of time. And this is very important, I think, because like especially it relates back to trauma and back into the chaos of the era that we're in like time itself changes things. And like you might be in a given situation, or society might be in a given situation, and you accept this as a kind of a constant, but it's not a constant because when you apply time, for example, 20 years or 200 years or 20 million years might pass, and you sit on the fence and look at it now in 20 million years' time, for argument's sake, in the future, if we're looking at, and it's completely changed. And we must remind ourselves. Do you remember when we sat on by the river that day, and we had the discussion, and we thought this was never going to change. This will always be this way. And look how much it has changed. And that force of time has, to use that metaphor, that river of time has flown past, and it has carried so much with it and brought so many new things with it. So it's an important thing, I think, to try to always remember that this movement of time, how it changes everything, kind of inevitably.
absolutely, absolutely agreed. And
Inherently,
I would even,
inherently.
sorry,
Oh yeah, no, sorry.
I would even add that because you're talking time in the collective general state of things, right? But even if you look at one's lifetime, um, time itself uh, is a bringer of change. I mean, you don't think the same way that you thought 20 years ago, personally,
Exactly,
individually,
yeah.
right? So, and choices that you made 20 years ago, probably or you wouldn't do them now. So it must be also accepted that, okay, listen, 20 years ago I made this choice, it's not suitable anymore, so I'll rectify it. Have this humility of saying, I've reevaluated. It doesn't, at the time I didn't know better, I thought it was the correct thing. Now I reevaluated and changed my mind and rectify it accordingly, right? With however it's necessary. So even at an individual level, that is verifiable. I completely agree with your observation about time. And sometimes, I mean, there's that saying that time heals all, or something like that. But in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healing per se, but certainly it brings the opportunities that we take them or not. That is, again, up to us. But opportunity for these changes that certainly, even if they look, um, you know, chaotic, problematic, dark, makes us stronger. I mean, I know I sound like Nietzsche now. Um, it is an observable fact. I mean, how do we come out of every period of darkness in our individual lives? We always come out stronger.
Not to play devil's advocate now on the point, but just I'm just throwing it out there. Like you could argue the opposite, right? You could say that potentially over time certain things may worsen. Like, and I'm not trying to be awkward, but like I mean, the one thing we can definitely say is things will change. They can change. You know what I mean? The change is inevitable, but you can look at it as we are now, really, in the from a positive point of view, that
Yeah.
things can normalize. And a kind of a funny thing is this concept of choice. You made a choice 20 years ago, and now you're not making that choice because. But like really, if you go back to the example, for example, my colleague who felt stress last year because of work and felt he was going to have a kind of a breakdown, and you know, I felt like saying to him, the best thing to do is to do nothing. What should I do? Do nothing. Don't do anything. Just be. And he'd say, well, that sounds like some kind of hippie Tibetan Buddhist thing or something. No, it's not really. It's just what I'm trying to say is trust in the machinations and the turning of the wheel. Let a year pass, or 2 years pass, or 5 years pass, and things will change. You actually won't have to do anything, or choose anything, or manifest your will in any way, or do anything at all. You just have to let things be over the period of time, and they will begin to change by themselves. So it's like a tree that grows in certain ways. Certain branches break off in various storms over the winters, and it grows at a certain angle because the light hit it better in that way, and the soil was of a certain, pH, whatever, and certain nutrients, etc., etc. So the final shape of the tree takes a certain form simply because that's what happened over time. And so it's like choice itself. Like who are you essentially in your heart and soul and your state of being at this exact moment? Like you're a product of what you've been through time, and you've harmonized certain things. There are certain oddities you have, and you accept it all sort of in the philosophical fullness of wisdom as identifying as being a human. Okay, I'm human. This is where I am. This is part of my humanity. I have a shadow side. I have a good side. I have various forces pulling at me. I have hopes, fears, ambitions. You know,
I agree,
there's
and in relation to your point that over time, of course, they can worsen. However, I would make a distinction, which is they worsen, and time worsens things that are not in alignment with the what I called organic. So if you
yeah,
are living, let's say, if you are living someone else's, someone sold you and you bought
yeah,
um, a style of life or whatever
yeah,
it
yeah,
is,
yeah,
things will only get worse. But if
yeah,
you eventually start aligning yourself with your organic essential self, time
yeah,
will always bring the best.
yeah.
Of course,
I
through
think that's
through
true. Yeah,
tribulation, tribulations, because once we need to get rid of the things we bought, right? So
yeah,
there are some tribulations towards achieving that, but I would just make that distinction. You are absolutely correct. I would just add the distinction that it gets worse for those that continue to prefer to live life stories that aren't theirs.
yeah.
But
And
for
a kind of
those who,
self-deception.
right, right, yeah, yeah, like Pink Floyd sang, "Living in Quiet Desperation," right?
But
So,
there's this term, the art of living. The art. It's like an art, like an artist, like so there's an art form to rectifying and ameliorating and harmonizing with these forces to identify the true resonant self, inner self, and to try and live in a sympathetic harmony with that, your true self.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, as you say there, time will bring blessings, bestow blessings upon, upon that individual who manages to manifest him or herself in that true category of inner harmony. But like it, I suppose maybe you could argue perhaps it's an increasing difficulty given this maelstrom of this chaotic environment that we're living in. It doesn't help our path, but at the same time it shouldn't deter us in any way, or if we're, or for some people maybe it would embolden them because they would see that, it'll help them. And perhaps it all depends how you, as an artist, engaged in the art of life and the art of living, um, kind of encompass and embroider those shadows into the tapestry of how you live.
Yeah.
So you could take the most difficult and traumatic and darkest forces around you, and you could weave them into as I said, like this, or paint them into the painting, or weave them into the tapestry in a beautiful way and make something amazing out of it. But as you say, and I agree with you, there's this trying to resonate with the inner self and the true self, and to find it, as they said in the Greek thing, to know thyself, to know thyself, who you are. Number one is a mission in itself, and then to try and live in a way that's true to that is
Oh, yeah.
also a major mission. But like, we have to believe that the fruits of a successful achievement of that are abundant and wonderful and
Okay.
a blessing indeed. Like,
Yeah. And it must be said also, and this I speak in everything I speak, uh, some of it observed, some of it actually lived. But when the blessings come, they come as opportunities. It is absolutely key to act in accordance. So if an opportunity emerges, an opportunity for a blessing emerges, this implies that you act upon it. You're not going to stand there waiting, for things to, oh, here's an opportunity, I'll just wait. No. You have to act upon it. And often, what you find is that the action to receive that blessing, to take that opportunity, goes against the collective, goes against what the collective feels it's correct, right? An example was 2020. The majority of the collective felt it was correct to take a certain thing, right? But you and people like us took an action in accordance to the opportunity given. We were given the opportunity to say no, and that we acted. So that then we took the blessing from it. Without the action, if we would just, oh, I see this, but I don't act, nothing happens. You stay the same, and you fall prey to the same things. So it always requires action, even if it goes against what the collective considers to be correct. Because what the collective considers to be correct is usually, well, I would say most of the times, a story that someone else wrote. It's not their story. And this is why I've started by saying that society was promoting a greater good that was no longer the greater good of the individual. If ever it was, but we can only speak for our lifetimes at least, or at most our parents. But
I think that's a very important point that they
Mhm.
and it was a masterstroke of the deviant psychological warfare effort that, as you say quite correctly, they promoted something that was not for the greater good or the good of the individual, but it was presented as such. That
Yeah.
was a masterstroke on a strategic masterstroke on their behalf, and that's to, you know, that we may never underestimate the capacity for malevolent manipulations, because they're very good at it, like very clever.
Yeah, they know us. They're our shadows.
Exactly.
They know every button. They know every button to push, right?
Exactly.
They reflect us. They know us inside out. That energy that reflects upon us is our energy. We gave them. We bought them. I mean, we outsourced to them this part. And this is something that's messed up for us to think about, because we always like to consider ourselves. Oh no, I'm a good person. I'm a great.
Yeah.
I'm this marvelous. That other guy, no, he's a liar, a deceiver, and etc. But me, no, I never lied in my life. I never did anything of that sort. We always like to protect our mental personalities with that, and so we
Well, it's
shield ourselves. Sorry.
no, it's a very interesting point that we somehow have, by outsourcing our shadow self, and without,
Yeah.
without resolving or encompassing our shadow self into the whole of who we are, that we've, somehow created the power structure because we've outsourced it onto them, as you say, like, and become. So it's very interesting, it's back to this kind of idea that it's ultimately a spiritual battle, these things.
Yeah. I was just going to comment that we created, or the monsters, or the Frankenstein monsters, that now do what they do, right? That's why I simply love the Frankenstein novel. None of the adaptations are good enough, but the Frankenstein novel, I think it's a pivotal book, far more pivotal than, for example, 1984 or any of those. As a novel, as a story, the Frankenstein novel, I don't know if you ever read it, but it's a magnificent depiction of how shadows work. It's the best depiction I've ever seen of how shadows work. You had a doctor that had a shadow side, and he gave into it and created the monster. And when he saw the monster as external, so his reflection, he saw the monster and he said, "Fuck, you're grotesque." And he rejected the monster. And the monster tried to be good. The monster actually tried to be virtuous. But he looked so grotesque. He was so ugly. He was the amalgamation of all that was ugly that everyone rejected him, until it finally, sparked hatred in him. And all he could feel was hatred and disdain and the will to destroy. Right? And so he pursued the doctor and everyone around him to the ends of, I mean, it went to the North Pole. That's where they end the story. And he only rested when he killed him, when the shadow finally killed his creator. And then he killed himself. This is absolutely, I mean, it's an impressive story. So going back to the point, yeah, we created these Frankenstein monsters. They are doing what we gave them power to do over time. Of course, it's not like we were born into this system, of course, but over time we accepted all these stories, we gobbled it up, we bought something that someone else sold. So in that sense, we're not victims, because we chose to believe the con man. So, but go on, Silas. Sorry about that.
Well, there was something I was going to mention, and I've been eavesdropping this conversation for quite some time. You know, I didn't want to stop you because, you know, as the young generation say, you know, that those bros were cooking, right? So it was a very good conversation. I wanted to mention that this idea, and you brought up quite a bit ago, of we don't, and you said, Zeal, we don't lean in to the hardship, to the suffering. We reject almost the feeling of discomfort. Now, of course, we can understand that in the long run, if we look at the long term, that time will devour us. Time devours all things. Like Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ozymandias is this hubristic, ironically hubristic monument to the absolute folly of man in the face of time. And arguably so is Frankenstein, but we'll get on to that. And it's this idea, and there was somebody brought it up in the server recently, that, you know, how does hardship ever do anyone any good? Well, of course, not all hardship is created equally. I agree. But if you're feeling discomfort, it's your body, your mind, and perhaps even your spirit communicating with you. So, for example, in the society at large, we have some very bizarre, aberrant behaviour. Substance abuse is rampant. Arguably, we live in a society that is the most mentally unwell since, well, since records began, really. The behaviour that it exhibits is beyond the pale. Again, because on a collective basis, in a collective sense, it's almost like the body, the very geist of society, the psyche of it, the spirit, the essence, is screaming out that something is wrong. The ancestors of us are haunting us, again, like Frankenstein's monster, chasing us to the ends of the earth, as rejected aspects, as irreconcilable, unresolved aspects that are, again, haunting us in our modern day. They are tearing at the fabric of society itself, tearing at the fabric of the psyche of the Western man, and arguably of the East Asian culture too. Another thing to mention as well, on that, by the way, as well, this really shows with the sort of pharmaceutical heavy society that we have, and even germ theory, that idea, where we believe all discomfort must have a cause that is external to ourselves. We externalize all discomfort.
Yeah.
It must be of an external cause, rather than perhaps it being an internal cause, or us looking introspectively at perhaps what is causing this discomfort. So, for example, in physical discomfort, when we're ill, it may be our body, because our body is always seeking equilibrium, a homeostatic balance. That's how the body functions. It's how all bodies in the universe function, be them organic or inorganic. Thus, the body is seeking to bring on that discomfort, to communicate to oneself, to perhaps desist from a certain dietary path, to perhaps desist from a certain strenuous exercise, whatever it may be. Again, to flush out the toxins, to flush out the bad habits, and to thus bring balance to the system. To reconcile the rejected aspects. So, and you know, we see with the pharmaceutical industry, they prey upon this path of least resistance, where people would rather instead of blaming themselves, outsource that blame to something that's unseen or cannot be seen by the average man. That's the invisible bacteria, the invisible germs. Again, these are all instances, they're all aspects of the societal wide neuroses that the West is enduring. Another thing to mention on Frankenstein is that Frankenstein and Victor Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, he chased him to the ends of the earth, yes, to the coldest regions. Again, this ties in with this notion of the underworld, perhaps of the unconscious itself. If you look at a tree, he chased them in terms of Kabbalah to the other side of the world, right? The other side, or the Sitra Achra, this Kabbalistic idea of the evil or the impure side of course, the opposing Sitra de Kevada, I think is the Hebrew pronunciation, which means the side of the Holy One, the side of the divine good, of the divine place. So it's this notion of Hades. Hades was a cold place, so was Niflheim, a cold and miserly domain where the dead fumble about like deracinated husks, seeking to satiate that which can never be satiated. Again, the hungry ghost, the Rakshaka archetype. They're seeking to reconcile things that perhaps are no longer in their power to reconcile. They are the sum total of the rejected aspects of themselves. They are that which remains after the shadow has devoured them, or perhaps even the fear of time has devoured them. Another thing to mention as well is that Frankenstein's monster was seeking, and I want your take on this, of course, because I think it ties in with the Gnostic creation myth and this idea of the dualistic paradigms that we see, the divine God and his consort. Pardon me. And Frankenstein's monster was seeking, if I recall correctly, the novel, because I read it about 15 years ago in high school. He was seeking for Victor Frankenstein to create a consort for him, to create, again, a reflection of him. Again, this ties into Cassiopeia, what we see with the world, right? It's this the reciprocal cycle of creation and destruction, of reflection and the shadow of said reflection. And we see that as well in Frankenstein. It begins at the end. So it's this notion that the beginning is the end, that the rejection of the shadow and the devouring of the light source by said shadow, again, the end devouring the beginning, is what spurs on the beginning. So what we see with Victor Frankenstein being murdered by Frankenstein's monster, that didn't reconcile anything. The only one who could reconcile any of that was Victor Frankenstein, but his ambition forced him to, well, in essence, to traverse a path which would lead to his own destruction.
And it was also his pride, we must say. Yeah,
absolutely, his pride. And Frankenstein's monster didn't reconcile anything. Eventually, I believe he died, or
he killed himself. He immolated
exactly.
himself. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. So what was done there again? But this is another thing I noticed at the end of Frankenstein's monster, is if Victor could figure out how to develop life by essentially establishing his own rejection, manifesting it in physical flesh, no matter how grotesque it was. Then, of course, by Frankenstein's monster immolating himself, essentially covering up the evidence of this great act of both blasphemy and scientific discovery, that essentially he set about the precedent of the repetition of this.
Yes.
Because no one learned from it. This is the idea. No one learned from the pride and its eventual fall. Again, through the shadow, the devouring of the pride by the shadow, or of the light source by the darkness.
Yes.
Again,
Yes, and
that's
there was
what's wrapped up in that. The beginning is the end, that notion.
yes, and there were several opportunities for Victor to stop ignoring his shadow, so stop ignoring the monster and deal with it. The monster didn't start his killing rampage immediately. The killing rampage in regards to the pursuit of everything that Victor loved, which is basically what shadows do. Shadows pursue everything we love because they envy us and they want to get back at us for having been rejected. And so there were several opportunities, and Victor always refused. I would also add, just on an earlier point that you made, and you've talked quite correctly about the externalization of illness. That what is the difference between saying a virus caused this illness, or hidden terrorists caused this building to collapse? There's absolutely no difference, because in one instance you always have to be on the lookout for this hidden enemy, invisible enemy that will make you ill, and on the other you have to always be on the lookout for this invisible enemy that will make your society ill, right? So the story, the blueprint is exactly the same. One applied in the micro, the other one applied in the macro, but the same script, the same blueprint, right? So going back to Frankenstein, absolutely agreed. He pursued Frankenstein. He killed several of his relatives and relations. And he eventually asked for Victor to create another like him, and he would leave him alone. And Victor started the process until he realized that, wait a second. Of course, he didn't put it in these words, but it's obvious. He thought, wait a second, I'm creating a second monster, so I'm creating a shadow of a shadow. And so this will never end. And of course, it didn't end, like you've well stated, in the manner that the book presented. But at least he didn't give it continuation, right? So he had at least that moment of clarity where he said, no, where he said, I will prefer to die at the hands of my shadow than to bring another of my rejected reflections onto manifestation. Right? So that is actually a very poignant moment in the novel, when he is just about ready to bring this female Frankenstein monster to life, and he stops himself at the very last moment with the monster outside the cabin in Scotland, actually, in was it called Orkney Islands?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. And he stops himself and he says, no, I cannot. I mean, the solution to my initial problem is not to create another problem, to double it, right? Because then they would ask for, oh, create another one, a child, create a dog, a Frankenstein dog, or create, right? It would never stop. So he had this moment of clarity and of assuming his responsibility and saying, no, I will not give continuation to this. I prefer the consequence of dying at the hands. I will isolate myself. And so he went to the North Pole, and I will die, if necessary, at the hands of my shadow. Of course, it didn't resolve it, but it didn't spread it, right? But again, that novel is really, I would suggest, you said you read it 15 years ago. I would suggest rereading it now, with your mindset now, and you will find a lot more than you found 15 years ago. So I would really recommend that.
There was something I was going to mention as well, and when I was playing that game Elden Ring, which is of course extremely highly Gnostic, so is the Dark Souls game. It's basically based upon the Gnostic creation myth, alchemy, Gnosticism. It has all of that symbolism there. But what's termed by the fan base as the worst ending is, and it's I believe it's quite a difficult ending to get. I never found it too difficult, but perhaps I was not necessarily I wasn't really conscious, or I wasn't aware of I just played the game, and I eventually came up with this ending, and I came up with pretty much them all in the end, after I replayed it and such. But there's this ending, and it's the worst ending supposedly, and it's called the Frenzied Flame. And what the Frenzied Flame is essentially the player character, instead of defeating the Elden Lord, meaning instead of defeating essentially the Demiurge, and in turn becoming the Demiurge, becoming the Elden Lord himself, the player character, that is, the player character are tarnished. They become the Lord of Frenzied Flame. They become possessed by what's called the Frenzied Flame. Now, the Frenzied Flame is almost like the Black Sun, and it's in a very destructive aspect of it. And essentially, right at the end of the game, you incinerate absolutely everything. You destroy everything. So it's the same idea as Victor Frankenstein being murdered by his monster, but the monster immolated himself because the only thing keeping the monster alive was the creator, was that which he hated. So it was the hatred. It was, the irreconcilability that kept the monster alive. And again, we can extrapolate this entire idea of the irreconcilability producing existence to the macrocosm, right? The irreconcilability of the Ouroboros and that structure of the cycle, the reciprocal cycles of creation and destruction, beginning and end, alpha and omega, whatever it may be. And again, you could almost view that in a toroidal manner. Even the arepo and the satyr arepo tenet opera rotas could be A repeating to O, alpha repeating to O, alpha repeating to omega, beginning repeating to end, or the beginning repeatedly producing the end, and the end repeatedly producing the beginning, once we flip that around with opera. So it's this notion that if you get rid of perhaps the irreconcilability of the shadow and its pride, then what do we have left? What does the pride and the shadow itself have left? I'm not talking about generally in an individual sense, but in a larger macrocosmic sense.
But that is the whole point, in my opinion, in my observation, in my contemplation. That is the whole point of the manifestation. The whole point of the manifestation is to know everything about itself, so including, of course, that supposedly irreconcilable aspect, by taking ownership, taking responsibility, by being as entire and complete as possible, right? And therefore cease to exist in this type of manifestation. And now you would say, oh, but would that mean that, whether you want to call it God or whatever, would cease to create, would cease to manifest, would cease to emanate? Not necessarily. It would mean that it would cease to create dualistically. It would cease to create contradiction embedded into manifestation. And so, if we can imagine, I think that every bit that we integrate about ourselves helps, let's put it like that, helps the original to integrate as well, right? So when all the pieces are collected, let's put it like that metaphorically, when all the little bits are integrated, you ask the correct question, what is left? Nothing. There's no need anymore for this manifestation of discovery. But that doesn't mean you can't manifest. That doesn't mean you won't manifest. You just will manifest in a completeness, which is something unimaginable for us. We cannot imagine existence without separation, because we've always, the only thing we've known was separation. And so to be complete is something unimaginable, but we get closer and closer, or try to, at least strive to. That is the whole point, right? And if I think that it's an inevitability as well. You were talking about inevitability, and I think that it is an inevitability as well, that somewhere along the path, the original is integrated as well. The original shadow is integrated. The original Frankenstein monster is integrated as well. I think it's inevitable, and that is what the why the F.A.T.E is to me significant a symbol.
Yes,
right? Because it is the serpent and the man, whether fighting or dancing, because probably they're doing both. Probably they're having at the same time a struggle and a love affair, because they can't live without each other, but they can't live with each other either, right? But at the end of it all, let's say, metaphorically, I think that the man and the serpent embrace and become one.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore ending duality. It doesn't mean that it ends manifestation, but it ends duality, ends separation. So that's, a bit symbolic and metaphorical, my views on that.
What was something to mention as well is, and I agree about the Ophiuchus, and I'll touch upon that shortly. You have this idea of Victor Frankenstein and his monster, and this notion is sort of tied up. This entire story is tied up with both Saturn and Kronos, his mutilation of Uranus, Calum, the sky god, his father. So
Jealous.
Saturn, Yes.
Callus, not Callum, but I was just correcting. Sorry.
Kalis, sorry, Kalis. Yes, yes. So the sky gods, the aspect of the unconscious. But of course, Saturn, Kronos, in that aspect becomes almost like the imposition of will, the monster himself, that which seeks to manifest, or it wants manifestation, doesn't get it, so thus it has to mutilate Uranus, Kalos. It has to mutilate and narrow the confines of the unconscious. It has to begin the process of conscious manifestation. That you could say Saturn or Kronos is the nous. It is the logical mind. And so that is a monster of, or a shadow of the unconscious. Again, Saturn would be that which is the tree that emerges from the roots. Of course, Uranus or Kalos are the roots, the subterranean roots. You could even liken, of course, Saturn or Kronos to the subterranean roots as well, given the chthonic aspect of it. But then we move on, and we see that Saturn and Kronos, though usurping the principle of kingship from his father, Uranus Kalos, he also, there's a prophecy that's provided to him, which intimates to him that one of his sons, or his progeny, his offspring, will overthrow him. So this puts him into a sort of paranoia. And of course, he devours, as time does, devours all of his children, imprisons them in his belly. And Rhea, of course, provides I believe it's called the Omphalos stone, instead of providing her last son, Zeus, and the mightiest of all her progeny, her offspring, from her marriage with Saturn, Kronos. And of course, it's what ends up happening is that Jupiter, Zeus, overthrows Saturn, Kronos. So again, the rebellious son archetype, the struggle for power, the struggle for recognition as well, is found in that too. So I think it's probably playing on those notions, which of course are rooted in deep psychological matters, and it's rooted in the macrocosm as well, the descent of the unconscious and the transformation of it, into which the unconscious is primordial chaos, the transformation of it into order. To mention too, in terms of Ophiuchus, if we look at the zodiac entirely and we imagine that Ophiuchus is that which is in the middle, of course, the 13th sign, of which all other signs emanate and radiate out of. So Ophiuchus, as that central monadic source, will always play the balancing point, will always play, as man does, that bridge between the upper and the lower. So, for example, that horizontal line between Cancer and Capricorn, not the equinoxes, the equinoxes actually, sorry. Aries and Libra are the solstices, I believe. So, am I correct in saying that? No,
Yes. Yeah. No,
am
it
I
is.
correct? Yes. So Cancer.
The solstice is the solstice is Cancer Capricorn. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, solstice is Cancer Capricorn, and equinox Aries Libra. Yeah, I was trying to memorize
Yes. Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
So, for example, Capricorn and Cancer, the Moon and Saturn, right? Both of them are complementary, but they're also oppositional. So Capricorn is the manifestation of the reconciling of the opposites, right? The fish, which exists in the abyss, and the goat, which climbs all vertical faces leading to heaven. The man who is the Capricornian man, I guess you could say, is that man which is of both. And he is the Saturnian. He is transcended that imposition of Saturn, right? In terms of a psychological archetype.
Yeah, the
Saturn,
climber. Yeah, the climber, the achiever, overcomer of obstacles. Yeah.
exactly. That idea that Jung brought up, I think it was in the Red Book, it was one of his books where he mentions a tree cannot reach to heaven unless its roots are anchored down in hell. So it's the same idea as Saturn and the Capricornian sign. But then we have Cancer. Cancer is that of the crab. It's that which is the fledgling, that is just emerging from the waters, from the primordial chaos, that is taking its first step of manifestation. So again, both of them are opposites. The Ophiuchus is that bridge between the two. We can take another example, Taurus and Scorpio. If we look upon Aldebaran and Antares, also found within the World Tarot card, they're two of the four royal stars of Persia, and these two, Taurus and Scorpio, are of Taurus is of the west. If I do believe, yeah, no, pardon me, Taurus is of the east and Scorpio is of the west, right? Scorpio is the mark of death. Taurus is the earth. It is that if you were to put Aries and Scorpio together,
Taurus.
again, pardon me, I'm making an illustration of the oscillations of time.
Sorry.
So if you put the signs of Taurus and Aries together, what you get is the peak and the trough, the horns of Taurus and the source of the ram's face with the horns of Aries. What you get is, again, put them together side by side, you get a sort of oscillation of time, right? It's that idea. Taurus would be the source of it'd be a trough of that oscillation of time. So Aries would be both the trough and the peak. Again, this all symbolizes really what Aries is. Aries is of fire, it's of energy. Taurus is more is of earth. It's a more calcified, stable aspect after the fire of the beginning of spring. So Taurus is of that. It's it's not of negation. It's not of chaos. It's stable. Scorpio is very transformative. It's mutable, as opposed to Taurus, which is immutable, you could say. Ophiuchus, again, is the middle point between the two, the bridge between the two. And in what this ties in with the toroid, right? The Taurus and Scorpio, again, if we were to view the zodiacal wheel and to trace out those radial patterns, Taurus, if you were to trace that radial projection out from the center of Ophiuchus, right, center of the zodiac, and then trace down Scorpio, that projection, that radial projection, it basically establishes what is a two-dimensional representation of a toroid. The center, the central axis, the axis mundi of that toroid would be, of course, Ophiuchus. So it's like what you're stating, and I'm more illustrative or astrological or esoteric sense, where Ophiuchus literally becomes the symbol of the reconciling of opposites, because
Absolutely.
the Ophiuchian man understands that the opposites are but an illusion. Again, this is the idea of between Boaz and Yakin, between the black and the white, the unconscious and the conscious. We understand that both actually reciprocally create one another, and both are but reflections of one another.
Yes,
Thus,
and the Ophiuchus, just a quick point, and the Ophiuchus will reach the point of reconciliation through the struggle between the opposites. So the idea is that he is able to observe from the middle point how the two opposites are in contrast, but at the same time attracted, right, to that center point, to that trying to reach that balance. Go ahead, sorry.
without, and just to add to that point, and it was something I was going to mention anyway, but
Oh,
it's not what you said, what my addition to your point, synchronistically, is that he understands that, but he doesn't get caught up emotionally or otherwise, in terms of providing energy, getting caught in the maelstrom of both, for example, in that case, Taurus or Scorpio, or getting caught up in any, again, he's of a neutral persuasion. He's both a spectator, but by just spectating, not in a sort of procrastinative way, not in a way that's lacking any verve, but in a way that he understands that both are reflections of one another, and that by him taking that central point, that point of the hermit, if you will, where he has that vantage point where he can observe both in their context and observe both as creations of the other.
yeah.
He can then control more easily from that axis mundi, right? You become at that point what I would term the universal man. And by becoming the universal man at the axis mundi, at the Yggdrasil, at the Irmun Sul, at the literal central nous or mind of the world and of the cosmos, you sort of tap into a sort of cosmos-psychic nexus of all knowledge, because you understand that that all knowledge is born of these dialectics, which fundamentally are illusory. Once you understand that, you have the key to open all doors of perception. So it's almost like a skeleton key to wisdom and knowledge and understanding itself, to the trinity, to the tria prima of all things. And at that point, you become an actual literal threat to the system. If you're not at that point, you're nothing more than a chatterbox, ultimately. You're nothing more than a man that seeks to fart against thunder, to piss against the wind. You're not going to make a dent upon this Goliath of Talos, right? The only way to destroy it is, again, to hit it at that Achilles heel point. Is to understand that you have, if you do not fundamentally understand, and again, it's like what we were discussing with the PsyOp matter. The PsyOps are built upon this manipulation of identity bias. Once they get you in a certain identity bias, right? And this is why I wouldn't, for example, what we're using, the methodology we're using, I wouldn't even name it. Because to name it is to then open it up to that manipulation of the identity bias, right? And once they bring you in to identifying with either Taurus or Scorpio, Libra or Aries, Pisces or Virgo or Cancer or Capricorn, wherever it may be, the opposite in its reflection, then they have you. They can control you then. They're a mechanism, a machine of chaos of which its fuel are the spectrums of extreme or extremity, right? If you're not of the extremes, of whatever extremes it may be, they don't have you. If you just simply understand the extremes are that perhaps they come from the same source, which they do, or they're mere reflections of one another, then you transcend these ideological parameters. You transcend the chains of one's own enslavement. You transcend those shackles that have kept man down since essentially the beginning of civilization and that pattern of human domestication. And you emancipate the soul, the spirit of man. Again, it's those ideas, I think, that people have to grasp. You will never find solutions in ideology. And that was my point regarding the auto-hoax thing and the fakeology thing and all of this. It's naming it. Once you, again, names and the reason for naming things. For example, even the reason we name death, it's because we can have some grasp of its notion, because death is the unknown. And by spelling out that name, again, there you go, spelling out, we almost, like King Solomon himself, we attempt to trap death in that narrow meaning. And by that narrowing of its meaning, by that quantification of really what is ultimately unquantifiable, the unquantifiable unknown, we attempt to almost sacrilegiously demean its power, right? The same thing with life itself, right? And as we've seen in the modern world, this idea of what we deem as life and not life, for example, in the debate of abortion, for example, that question of abortion and abortion rights and reproductive rights and things such as that, life can be skewed because we name it. And because we name it, the narrow meaning that we ascribe to it can be substituted, it can be distorted, it can be, completely upended as well. Because all it is a placeholder for something that's quite frankly beyond our comprehension. So, yeah, I don't think, see those are the ideas I have regarding ideology and things such as that. That's why I also call ideology a snare. And I'm not necessarily saying because what we fundamentally believe is the same thing. What I've just voiced here and what you've voiced previously. So I think it's moving beyond the names, the titles of it. Which of course there's problems in terms of advertising that, but do we have to advertise it? Or do we simply just have to experience it, live it? That itself, the example we set, provides its own proof, if you will.
Yeah, you make a good point that it may not be, but my contention was with the association of, or misassociation of the term with, something that it's not in practice. And I don't mind if, it's treated with a different word or not treated with a word at all, like you suggest, and quite correctly. But I think it becomes, like we've seen, it becomes, if it's misrepresented, because we need words to communicate for us, right? So, as you know, my initial motto was truth speaks no words. And it's true, right? So the words can never, ever depict anything true. But we have to communicate by approximation. And so we we should try to, be more or as precise as we can to avoid confusion on the part of communication between us. Regarding the what you were saying previously about Ophiuchus, I agree, and it reminded me. I know that you have already had contact with that, but it reminded me of a poem that I also read in my channel years ago from a Romanian poet. That I suggest that if you publish this this conversation, I believe it's good enough to be published. Include that video or that poem in the end, because I think it wraps up nicely. It really represents the balance, the approach that is not emotional to either of the extremes. As time brings about the highs and lows, the poet remains in that central point, determined to that central point.
Time goes by, time comes along. All is old and all is new. What is right and what is wrong, you must think and ask of you. Have no hope and have no fear, waves that rise can never hold. If they urge or if they cheer, you remain aloof and cold. To our sight a lot will glisten, many sounds will reach our ear. Who could take the time to listen and remember all we hear? Keep aside from all the patter, seek yourself far from the throng, when with loud and idle chatter, time goes by, time comes along. Nor forget the tongue of reason, or its even scales depress, when the moment, changing season, wears the mask of happiness. It is born of reason's slumber, and may last a wink as true. For the one who knows its number, all is old and all is new. Be as to a play spectator, as the world unfolds before. You will know the heart of matter should they act two parts or four. When they cry or tear asunder, from your seat enjoy along, and you'll learn from art to wonder what is right and what is wrong. Past and future, ever blending, are the twin sides of same page. New start will begin with ending when you know to learn from age. All that was or be tomorrow, we have in the present too. But what's vain and futile sorrow you must think and ask of you. For the living cannot sever from the means we've always had. Now, as years ago and ever, men are happy or are sad. Other masks, same play repeated, different tongues, same words to hear. Of your dreams so often cheated, have no hope and have no fear. Hope not when the villains cluster, by success and glory drawn. Fools with perfect lack of luster will outshine Hyperion. Fear it not, they'll push each other to reach higher in the fold. Do not side with them as brother. Waves that rise can never hold. Sounds of siren songs call steady toward golden nets astray. Life attracts you into eddies to change actors in the play. Steal aside from crowd and bustle, Do not look, seem not to hear. From your path, away from hustle, if they urge or if they cheer. If they reach you, go faster. Hold your tongue when slanders yell. Your advice they cannot master. Don't you know their measure well? Let them talk and let them chatter. Let all go past, young and old, unattached to man or matter. You remain aloof and cold. You remain aloof and cold, and if they urge or if they cheer, waves that rise can never hold. Have no hope and have no fear. You must think and ask of you what is right and what is wrong. All is old and all is new. Time goes by, time comes along.